Big Boys Games by Rob Mukherjee. Carl gazed disconsolately across the battlefield. The Battle of Pydna was not going well. On the left flank, his archers were about to be overrun by a phalanx of elite Spartans that had just taken out the cavalry set to protect the lightly armed bowmen. Things on the right were no better. Although his forces there were yet to sustain significant losses, they were in the path of several units of heavily armed Macedonians, all pikes and shields and strength in numbers. He briefly wondered if Maximus Decimus Meridius had had Sunday afternoons that went like this. Probably not. Simon smirked from across the table. I told you last time that the Romans never enter a battle without a clear strategy. I can't believe you haven't even read Theobald's Secrets of the World's Greatest War Machine. If you won't immerse yourself in the period, then you can't expect anything other than another massacre. Simon always thoroughly immersed himself. Theobald's incredibly worthy, incredibly dull tome on Roman warfare was only the beginning. A whole shelf in Simon's library, read spare room, groaned under the weight of titles such as Great Persian Victories and Rise of the Byzantine Empire. Carl had asked Claudia about it once, and she'd confirmed that every one had been read and reread, with key passages underlined and important pages marked with little sticky tags. Claudia, elegant, witty and beautiful Claudia, how she had ended up with a bore like Simon was a mystery. But he's sweet, darling, in his own way, she'd confided. And as long as he's happy with his games, it leaves me free to play mine. Besides, she'd archly observed, you do choose to play your games. No one forces you. Guilt could be a terribly motivating force, Carl reflected gloomily, as he reached out to move General Marcus Furius Camillus and his men behind cover and out of reach of the Macedonians. Simon's response was immediate. You can't do that! You can't cross a hedge and a ditch in the same turn! Without needing to resort to the rule book, Carl knew that Simon would be right. From the tabletop, the inch-high metal figure of General Camillus seemed to look at Carl with an air of utter disapproval, as if to say, how could you be so foolish as to think we could cross a hedge and a ditch in a single turn? Do you not know the first thing about warfare in ancient eras? Now we are stuck next to this ditch with many, many Macedonians bearing down on us. It hadn't always been like this. 20 years ago, when they'd been in their early teens, they'd started collecting metal soldiers. Carl had always preferred the fantastical ones, the dragon riders, the trolls and ogres that he spent hour after hour meticulously painting, each one a little work of art. But somewhere along the line, Simon had decreed that it was no longer fitting for grown men to while away the hours on such whimsies, and so they'd started gaming with historically accurate toy soldiers instead. Whilst their friends had lost interest and dropped out one by one, they'd regressed from the Somme to Gettysburg, Agincourt, and eventually ancient eras, a period Carl had dreaded from the start, if only because he foresaw its potential to lead Simon to indulge in even more geek spasms as he plumbed greater and greater depths of historically accurate banality. At least it led Carl to see a bit more of Claudia. Simon moved two groups of Macedonians so that they were in base-to-base contact with General Camillus and his men, and then consulted the game's overly complex combat resolution tables. Let's see. I have the advantage because you're by a ditch. I outnumber you. And he reached out and laid the first rank of Karl's soldiers on their side. From this position, the general was positively scowling at Karl and his incompetence. In the old days, when it was armies of dwarves and elves lining up against the assorted forces of chaos, the outcome of battles owed much to the roll of dice. Luck had played a big part in the battles, which seemed far closer to real life to Karl than the mix of strategy, tactics, and tables complex enough to make an actuary blush that governed warfare in ancient eras. His thoughts briefly returned to their default position of how had Simon ended up with Claudia? Correction, how had Simon ended up married to Claudia? Simon, meanwhile, was ecstatic. "Time for the great reveal," he said, picking up several Macedonians and replacing them with an impressive, albeit poorly painted, model of an armoured elephant, complete with howdah and several well-armed, why were Simon's forces always so well-armed, soldiers riding on its back? General Camillus' day was about to go from bad to, well, stomped on by an elephant. Karl was apoplectic. How the fuck are you supposed to get that close to my soldiers without them noticing you've got a fucking elephant? It's in the rules! Simon crowed, oblivious to Karl's rage. You know you don't have to reveal a secret weapon until it will inflict the greatest damage. This was Simon's favourite rule, despite it flying in the face of the historical accuracy that he otherwise cherished so much. Thanks to that rule, Karl had managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of near certain victory in countless encounters across the ages. Let him have his victories. Claudia had purred, soothing his petulance. You know you have yours. Before Karl had time to think, Simon started removing figures from the board, chuckling to himself. Well, I think that's that. I'm surprised you didn't put up a better defence, though. In truth, the Romans overwhelmed the Macedonians at Pydna. He paused, then added, probably knew to have their archers on the lookout for elephants. Something snapped inside Karl. 20 years of military defeats and patronising condescension fueling this anger. In one move, he leant over the table and flicked General Perseus of Macedon from one side of the battlefield to the other. The figure teetered on the edge of the table for a moment and then fell to the floor. Hey! Don't do that! Simon remonstrated, rushing round to recover the general and then gasping, Look! You've bent his spear! The two men were face to face now, as Simon's oft-repeated words echoed through Karl's mind once more. Only reveal a secret weapon when it will inflict the greatest damage. I'm fucking your wife. Karl announced calmly, I don't have time to read Theobald's Secrets of the World's Greatest War Machine because I'm too busy fucking your wife. Karl turned and he walked away from the battlefield. The battle lost, a war won.